We've been dealing with the books of law. They are 5 books that are combined that are called, in some sense, for convenience sake, the books of the law. They could just as easily be called the writings of Moses. These 5 books are called the Pentateuch, or vessel of 5, and so they begin with creation, and then they end up with God's people at the border of entering into the land that God promised to Abraham. That we talked about the book of the Old Testament as being a book of journey, and so a lot of what you hear in these books is about journey. You hear that in the first 5 books of the Bible. You also begin to hear about journey in the next 12 books. So much of this book is about understanding and studying and knowing what the various journeys are. And we told you last week that there are 6 journeys, and we won't go over that now. But the reason we told you about that is to put it in context as we go along in the lesson, so that you can see what journey is happening. So we know that one of the journeys was out of Egypt, and the people of God have come out of Egypt, and they're going through the wilderness. And in the book of Joshua, they're going to go into the land. That's the next journey. So we always talk about these journeys as being in and out of the land. And we told you, first journey that God gives is Abraham, sending him from Mesopotamia, the land of Ur, not Oz, the land of Ur, into the land that I'll show you. The land that he showed him, he ended up in a place called Shechem, which is in the land of Israel, the land of promise that God would ultimately give to his people. And he arrives there, and God says that this is not your final destination. You are here now, but I'm telling you, in the 15th chapter of the book of Genesis, that your people are going to be in Egypt for 435 years, after which I'm going to deliver them and bring them out, and bring them back into the land. So that's the sense of journey that is associated with the people of Israel. So you have to remember that when we are talking about these books, God's primary message in these first 5 books and throughout the rest of the Old Testament is to the people that he has called out, the family of Abraham. And you keep that focus, that the lens is on Abraham and his family. It's on the emergence of other leaders throughout the Old Testament. That's the primary lens. But of course, as we're looking at Moses, as we're looking at Abraham's family, we also interface with Egypt. We also interface with Syria. We also interface with a place called Babylon. We interface with a place called Persia. And maybe as we go along, I'll tell you the 5, I believe it's the 8 interacting or interlocking nations. So the nation of Israel and all of the nations that they interface with is the kind of thing that we'll be talking about as we go along. All right, so that much for the opening. Let's move back into the Word of God. And listen, I'm going to try to not repeat some of the things that we talked about last week, and I'm going to try to journey into this book. But we do have to say that the book of Deuteronomy, of course, is a book that references repeat, or it is a deuteros, meaning second time around, but it simply is a book that is a book of review and a book of the do-over, if you will. God re-establishing instructions that he had given to his people. And we refer to it then as the book of remembrance, Deuteronomy, the book of remembrance. It is a call by God for his people to remember the past, and for them to walk into the commandments of the present, and then for them to affect their future and be a position that they might enter into the land. We talked about the wonderful thing about the book of Deuteronomy. We talked about the reality that it has an introduction and it also has a conclusion. And the introduction in Deuteronomy is chapters 1 through 4, and then the conclusion is chapters 31 through 34. And so in between there, we have chapters 4 through 11, which are dealing with the Ten Commandments, and then in chapters 12 through 26, we're dealing with related commandments, commandments that God gave them for living. Then in chapters 27 through 30, we deal with blessings and curses. So I want to move right in, and that we understand that, as I told you last week, that the key verse in this book of Deuteronomy is Deuteronomy 6, chapter 6 and verses 4 and 5. Know ye the Lord your God, he is one God, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. We told you that is referred to as the Shema. It means the word Shema means to listen with the intent to act. It is pay attention. It is gather your attention, because it reads this way again. Deuteronomy 6, 4 and 5. It says, "Hear." The verse begins with "Hear, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might." That is the core of this book. It is a core scripture for the entire Bible. It is a word that Jesus repeats in the New Testament. And so when we talk about something that is deeply embedded in a book that channels something about Christ, we then talk about that as the Christology of the book. The Christology of the book, simply a way of saying that it is a book that emphasizes and focuses on the evidence of Christ right there in the midst of the book. And so there is Christology, if you will, in the book of Deuteronomy, because Deuteronomy focuses in places on things that Christ talked about, things that point to Christ. So we know that, number one, talking about Christology, that Jesus quoted from Deuteronomy more than any other book in the Old Testament. When he was using words to quote, it had been said, you have heard in the law. Most of the times he was quoting from Deuteronomy, because it is the book that he quoted from the most. So that's talking about Christ in Deuteronomy, the Christology of Deuteronomy. Also, the temptation of Jesus in Matthew chapter number 4, where Jesus began to quote scriptures to the enemy. He was quoting from Deuteronomy. You guessed it. He was quoting from Deuteronomy. So that really the Shema, it forms a basis for the greatest commandment, which Jesus so eloquently talked about in the Gospels, when the young man came to him and saying, "What good deed can I do?" And Jesus told him to go and sell all that he had. But before he told him that, he said, "You know the commandment: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." And the young man at some point says, "All these things I've done." And Jesus says, "Well, you left one thing out. Go and sell all that you have and give it to the poor, and then you'll be ready to follow me." So in other words, Jesus lifted the Shema and used it as a basis for this young man to really establish the direction that his life should take. Because again, and actually, I want us to understand it clearly. So I'm just touching on that. But the young man came to Jesus and said, "What is the greatest commandment?" And Jesus began to talk about which commandment is greatest, and he really begins to talk about the greatest commandment being a commandment of love, because that's what the Shema is about. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then Jesus said the second is like unto it: love your neighbor as yourself. And oftentimes that's where we fall apart at, is we fail to understand that there is loving God with all of our heart, but then loving our neighbors as we love ourselves. So all of that, the Shema, that teaching comes out of the book of Deuteronomy. And then very interestingly, and we can go there right now just to look at it. And that's Deuteronomy 18 and 15. Deuteronomy 18 and 15, because there we see where Jesus really points out the coming of a greater prophet. That's Deuteronomy 18 and 15, and just so that you be able to know that. Um, and let's look at what Moses has to say there in Deuteronomy 18 and 15. He says, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your midst, from your brethren. Him you shall hear." So this is considered to be a Christological, a prophetic utterance by Moses, wherein he predicts a greater prophet, or he predicts a prophet being raised up among them, and that you will hear him. And the only prophet that they heard was the prophet Jesus, if you will. He wasn't just a prophet, but he was certainly a prophet. And so this points to Moses talking about a new prophet that the Lord is going to raise up, a prophetic utterance that points to Christ. So it is a Christological utterance. And I don't mean to use any huge terminology, but I do want you to get Christology in your vocabulary, because Christology is simply the study of Christ. I know some folk would say, "Well, you're saying Christology." No, it's pronounced Christology, okay? And a Christological look at something means that you're looking at it from the perspective of Christ himself. And so we've been looking ever so briefly at Christ in the book of Deuteronomy, Christ in his relationship to the book of Deuteronomy. And we looked at this last verse here, Deuteronomy 18 and 15, wherein it points out that that Moses begins to tell them that another prophet from among your brethren is going to be raised up, and he's going to you're going to hear. And of course, that prophet is that prophet is Jesus, and he predicts that he's going to be from among your brethren. So this is a significant prophetic utterance, because it is a word that is saying that this prophet that's going to come, he's going to be like unto you. He's coming in the human condition. Now, for sure, Jesus, or I should say, Moses is not saying clearly that the Messiah is coming, God is coming in human flesh, and so on and so forth. But when you look at this prophetic utterance in hindsight, then you see exactly what Moses was talking about. That's why we talked a little bit earlier about how the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed, and the New Testament is the Old Testament revealed. So when you look at this prophetic utterance retrospectively, you can see that he was talking about Christ. All right. So we talked about a little bit last week, as we move forward now, the repeating themes of the book of Deuteronomy. We talked about across these 34 chapters, because this is a book with 34 chapters. We talked about across these 34 chapters, there are critical key words that just define this book. And those words are remember. Remember what God has done. Those words are remember. Another word there is love. Another word is obey, and then teach and choose. So 5 critical words that are always floating around the book of Deuteronomy. And those words are remember, love, obey, teach, and choose. Remember, love, obey, teach, and choose. And specifically, we break those words out where it says, remember what God has done. Love the Lord with your whole heart. Same words. Remember, love. Remember what God has done for you. Love the Lord with your whole heart. Obey God's commandment. There's obey, love, remember, love, and obey. And then teach the next generation, and then choose life and faithfulness. So remember, love, obey, teach, and choose. We we talked about the facts of this book. We know that Moses is the author. We know that the audience is Israel, the offsprings of Abraham. The second generation after the Exodus is the audience here. the second generation after the Exodus. Remember that those that came out of Israel that were 40 years and older, that they all died in the wilderness except for Joshua and Caleb. Even Moses died in the wilderness. The rest, they all died in the wilderness that were 40 years and older. And so this generation that is being talked about and talked to in the book of Deuteronomy is the second generation in the wilderness. I don't know how many generations they are from Abraham. It sounds like it could be some 10 generations, maybe 10 or 11 generations, or maybe even 12 generations, because we're talking about 435 years or so in the land of Egypt. And then we're talking about beginning with Abraham's life. And so it looks like there are 12 generations. If a generation is 40 years, that there are 12 generations up. By this time, there are 12 generations in or so. That's what it would seem like. But this is the second generation in the wilderness. The first generation that came out died in the wilderness, and their children are now mature. Their children are now grown, because the 40 and older, they all died in the wilderness except for Joshua and Caleb. So the audience is to that second generation. We told you last week the place is in the plains of Moab. That's on the east side of the Jordan River. We have to talk about the reality that you cross the Jordan to get to the gates of the promised land. You cross the Red Sea in order to get away from Pharaoh and his army. You cross the Red Sea. Now, ultimately, to get to the promised land, you got to cross that River Jordan. So let's not get it twisted. There were significant crossings, but two major crossings. The first crossing is the crossing of the Red Sea, wherein God uses it as an act of deliverance of his people, and destroys the army of Pharaoh in the Red Sea. Pharaoh's army drowns in the Red Sea. But then there is this major crossing when the people of God are finally positioned and ready to enter into their land of promise, and that is the crossing of the Jordan. So the purpose of this book is to prepare. Remember that we talked about Deuteronomy as a book of remembrance, but it's also a book of preparation. It's to prepare the people to enter into the promised land by renewing their covenant with God. Enter into the promised land by renewing their covenant. Now, a lot of people, when they talk about the promised land, a lot of people are saying the promised land, and they're using all kind of ways of saying that. But I want you to understand the articulation of the scriptures. When we talk about the children of Israel, they're moving towards not the promised land, the promised land with an ED on the end. Because remember, it is the land that God promised to Abraham. So they're going to the promised land. And so the purpose of this book is to prepare Israel to enter into the land that has been promised to them. And the starting place for that is to get them to renew their covenant with God, to come away from their ways that have been contrary to God, and to renew their covenant relationship. And we understand the key part of this book is to remember. All right. So now, as we look at just a couple of things here, we trying to cut a few things short here. But let's just look for just a moment at some of the critical and defining events that take place in this particular book. So I told you that the introduction deals with chapters 1 through 4, and is remembrance of the past, And by the time you get to that chapter number 4, verse 44, then it deals with a call to obedience, And so in chapters 1 through 3, we deal with some events that are critical for us to think about, because remember, those chapters are dealing with the importance of remembering. And so we're going to open up to those chapters for just a moment, just to kind of look through there real fast. But I want to tell you what those things are in those chapters 1 through 3. One is their failure at a place called Kadesh Barnea. A second thing is wilderness discipline. And then the third thing is their victories over Sihon and Og, over various kings that they confronted in the wilderness. And the lesson that is learned in those first 3 chapters is that unbelief denies God's or delays God's promise. Unbelief delays God's promise. That's what those first 3 chapters is designed to do. It is a review of their failure at Kadesh Barnea. It is a review of wilderness discipline. It is a review of a victory that God gave them over various kings that confronted them in the wilderness. But ultimately, those first 3 chapters is to highlight that unbelief delays the promise. Now, remember that this book is about their journey to the promised land. And the first thing that God does in these chapters 1 through 3 is remind them of the fact that unbelief will delay the promise. Now, we have to keep that in mind, don't we? Because we want to see the promises of God be yes and amen at all times in our life. But we have to understand that unbelief will delay the promises of God in your life. So let's look at chapter 1 for just a moment, and let's just see some of these things in these first 3 chapters, if you will. So, verse number, let's look at verse number 3 here. Now, if you look at, well, I'm trying to cut through some of these names so we can move a little fast. Look at verse 2. It is 11 days journey from Horeb by way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. So we notice the place we're talking about. Now it came to pass, and we're in that first chapter of the book of Deuteronomy. It came to pass in the 40th year, in the 11th month. Remember, we're getting near the time to enter into the land of promise. And this is our evidence of their having been in the wilderness for some 40 years. It says, now, so it came to pass in the 40th year of the 11th month, on the first day of the month, that Moses spoke to the children of Israel according to all the Lord had given him as commandments to them, after he had killed Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt in Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, who dwelt at Ashtaroth in Indir. Now, just think about here that the Lord is speaking to them to renew the covenant, speaking to them about remembrance. But this is after God has, the Lord have given him, I should say, the Lord commands him to speak to the children of Israel. And they start out with a remembrance that he had killed the Amorite king that was against them. He killed the king of Bashan that was against them. And listen to what God begins to say then in verse number 5. He says, on this side of the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moses began to explain this law, saying, the Lord our God spoke to us at Horeb, saying, you have dwelled long enough at this mountain. Turn and take your journey, and go to the mountain of the Amorites, to all the neighboring places in the plains and the mountains, and in the lowlands, and in the south and the east, and on the seacoast, to the land of the Canaanites, and so on and so forth. Look at verse 8. Just read along to just see a few things here. It says, see, I have set the land before you. This is how Deuteronomy is starting out. I've set the land before you. Go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give to them and their descendants after them. Now, I'm reading in the New King James Version, so it may read a little bit different. But this is where we focus and know that he's talking about the land of promise, the promised land. Notice in verse 8 again, see, I have set the land before you. Go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to your fathers. That's where we talk about a promised land. Swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give to them and their descendants after them. Okay? And so the next portion of this is the appointment of various tribal leaders. And notice here in verse number 9, And I spoke to you at that time, saying, I alone am not able to bear you. The Lord your God has multiplied you, and here you are today as the stars of heaven in multitude. May the Lord God of your father make you 1,000 times more numerous than you are, and bless you as he has promised. And notice here, Moses is reminding them that I've appointed leaders. Look at verse 15. That'll cut right into it. So I took the heads of your tribes, wise and knowledgeable men, and made them heads over you, leaders of thousands and leaders of hundreds and leaders of fifties, and so on and so forth. Look at verse 16. Then I commanded your judges at that time, saying, hear the cases between them. So Moses is just saying that, listen, I delegated authority. We set up all kinds of things in order for there to be efficiency. And then he lays out the fact that the shame at Kadesh Barnea was their refusal to enter into the land. Look at verse 19. So you departed from Horeb and went through all that great and terrible wilderness which you saw on the way to the mountains of the Amorites, as the Lord our God had commanded us. You went through all this wilderness. You went through all this trouble. And then still looking at verse 19. It's really important here. Then we came to Kadesh Barnea. Watch this. Just remember that one of our critical points there was that the shame of Kadesh Barnea. It says, and I said to you, you have come to the mountain of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is giving us. Look, the Lord your God has set the land before you. Go up and possess it. And the Lord God of your fathers has spoken to you. Do not fear or be discouraged. And every one of you came near to me and said, let us send men before us, and let them search out the land for us, and bring back word to us of the way by which we should go up, and the cities in which we should come. So now we understand that Kadesh Barnea is the place where these men were sent from. That was the place where Moses said, it's time to go. Let's go in now. And now we see that it was not an ideal that originated with Moses to send those 12 spies, that this originated among the people. Now, we don't discover that until the book of Deuteronomy. That's why this book is so important, as Moses began to rehearse to them the things they need to remember. And just to verify this, look at verse number 22. And every one of you came near and said, let us send men before us. Okay. And then look at verse 23. The plan pleased me well. Moses said, I accept the plan. So I took 12 of your men, one from each tribe, and they departed and went up into the mountain and came to the valley of Eshcol and spied it out. They also took some of the fruit of the land and brought it down to us, and they brought back word to us, saying, it is a good land which the Lord our God is giving us. Nevertheless, look at verse 26. Nevertheless, you would not go up, but rebel against the command of the Lord your God. This is Moses reading the indictment, saying, hey, listen, God's ready to take you in, but you need to remember some things. You need to have a remembrance of the past. It said you were not willing to go up and take the land in verse number 26. In verse 27, and you complained of your tents and said, because the Lord hates us, he has brought us out of the land of Egypt to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us. Where can we go up? Where can we go up? Our brethren have discouraged our hearts, saying, the people are greater and taller than we are, and the cities are great and fortified up to heaven. Moreover, we have seen the sons of the Anakims there. In other words, you know the story. He's reminding them that these folks that you wanted to go and take a look, they came back and said, there are giants over there. The cities are fortified. We can't do it. And so in verse 29, then I said to you, do not be terrified or afraid of them. The Lord your God, who goes before you, he will fight for you according to all who did his will. According to all he did for you in Egypt. In other words, Moses said, I told you. Think about what he did in Egypt. Moses said, I was trying to remind you back then. Look at how he destroyed Egypt. Why would you be afraid to go forward when God has brought you thus far? We got to keep in mind that we come this far by faith. We might as well stay in the faith that we've come this far with. But notice here in verse 28 again, in the latter part of that verse, it says that Anakins were there. Now we know that they're talking about giants in the land, huge men. In some cases, some believe that they're referring to a mixed breed, a mixed culture of part angel and part men, part fallen angel and part men. And so they said there were Anakins over there. Now, you know, sometimes when people become afraid, they have a tendency, and I'm not saying that there were not huge people over there, because the grapes were the size of a man's hand. So we know that they were eating big. So we know that there were what we might consider giants in the land. But you know, when people get afraid, they have a tendency to exaggerate as well. They have a tendency to make their problems bigger than what they really are. Somebody once said that if you look at the bigness of your problem, your God will seem small. But if you look at the bigness of your God, your problem will always seem small. So I don't know which way where they got it messed up at, but they missed something. Let's look at verse 29 as we go through here just a little bit. These first three chapters lay the foundation kind of for this book. Now, in 29, it says, "Then I said to you, do not be terrified and do not be afraid. The Lord will go before you. He will fight for you according to what he did with the Egyptians." Verse 31, "And in the wilderness where you saw how the Lord your God carried." So Moses not just saying, look at what he did for you in Egypt. Look at how he brought you out of Egypt. But he said, look at how he carried you through the wilderness. Look at what he has done for you all this time that brought you to Kadesh Barnea. Look at what he's done to you. He said, and I'm looking in verse number 31, the latter part, "in all the way that you went until you came to this place." Look at 32. "Yet for all that you did not believe the Lord your God, who went in the way before you to search out a place for you to pitch your tents, to show you the way you should go, in the fire by night and in the cloud by day." Now he's telling them that, listen, you went through the wilderness and God was showing you in real time which way to go. Fire by night was leading you, and a cloud by day was leading you. He said, yet you did not believe. And now the next part of this deals with the penalty for your rebellion. And this is why we have to kind of look at this, and I'm trying to move as fast as we can, but look at it. In verse 34, he says, the Lord heard the sound of your words and was angry and took an oath, saying, surely not one of these men of the evil generation, of this evil generation, shall see that good land of which I swore to give to your fathers. Not one of this evil generation, except, look at verse 36, except Joshua the son of Jephunneh, and he shall see it, and to him and his children I am giving the land on which he walked, because he wholly followed the Lord. We're not even talking about Joshua yet, but Caleb. You don't get to hear a lot about him all the time. But notice the Lord said that he wholly followed after the Lord. That's not H-O-L-Y, that's W-H-O-L-L-E-Y, or W-H-O-L-L-Y. He followed wholly or completely after the Lord. Look at verse 37. The Lord was also angry with me for your sake, saying, even you shall not go in. Now, that's Moses saying, and God told me that y'all messed this thing up so bad that even you, Moses, are not going in. But he mentions Caleb first and said, Caleb going in. Caleb followed me wholly. All right? And he gets to be the first mention here. And then verse 38, Joshua, the son of Nun, who stands before you, he shall go in there, encourage him, for he shall cause Israel to inherit. My God. Do you hear God saying to Joshua, you're not, to Moses, you're not going in. Caleb's going in. He followed me wholly. He stayed true to the assignment. Now, Moses, I'm not letting you go in, but I'm telling you to go and encourage Joshua, because Joshua is going to be the one that's going to cause the people to inherit. Can you imagine God telling you, you're not walking in the blessing, but I want you to encourage that other fellow because he's going to make it. You ain't going to make it. Yeah, there are some people that God using to encourage somebody else, but that does not mean that they're going to make it in. That just means that they are the conduit for which God is using them to draw you into your purpose. Now, this is not to suggest that Moses went to hell. There's every contrary evidence against that. But it is to make very clear that he could not go into the inheritance, the land that God promised, because of the issues with this rebellious people and how he managed some things in dealing with this rebellious people. We got to move on now. And looking at verse 40, said, moreover, your little ones and your children, who you shall, who you say will be victims, who today have no knowledge of good or evil, they shall go in there. So that's that next generation. So those that came up, they were not responsible for your behavior, and so they get a second time, or they get a renewed chance. They're going to go in. To them I will give it, and they shall possess it. Look at verse 40. But as for you, turn and take your journey into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. Go backwards. You see that, right? Then you answered and said to me, we have sinned against the Lord. We will go up and fight just as the Lord God commanded us. And when every one of you had girded on his weapons of war, you were ready to go up into the mountain. And the Lord said to me, tell them, do not go up nor fight, for I am not among them. They got themselves in rebellion, and now they're trying to make it up without the rebellion being corrected. They said, we're ready to mount up. We're ready to go fight now. And God said, I told you, I sent word by Moses to tell you, don't go out there, because I'm not with you. You have a rebellious spirit. And even though you're ready to fight now, your rebellious spirit, I'm not with you. He says, look at that verse 42. It shows you some things about God that we have to understand. And the Lord said to them, tell them, I do not go up and fight. I am not among you, lest you be defeated before your enemies. So I spoke to you, yet you would not listen. There it is again. See, when God told them to go, they wouldn't go. When God told them not to go, now they're ready to go. It's rebellion to not go when he tell you to go, but it's also rebellion to go when he tell you not to go. Now, I hope I got that right. It's so it brought out the spirit of rebellion. God told them they could go into the land. They were unwilling to go. That's rebellion. Then they decided on their own that we're ready to go now, and God said, don't go. And they went. That's rebellion. And so he said, well, and I want you to hear this word in verse 43. So I spoke to you, yet you would not listen, but rebelled against the command of the Lord. And I want you to see this word here, presumptuously went up into the mountain. Presumptuously went up into the mountain. And the Amorites who dwelled in the mountain came out against you and chased you as bees do. I mean, they just chase you away. They had you so afraid and so being stung, if you will, that you running like you running from bees, and drove you back from Seir to Hormah. Then you returned and wept before the Lord, but the Lord would not listen to your voice, nor give ear to you. So you remained in Kadesh many days, according to the days that you spent there, because of their rebellion. This is that what he's trying to get them to do is to be ready to walk into the promises of God. And so I told you, these first 3 chapters are all remembrance, calling them back to the past. Let's look at chapter number 2 real quickly. We can't spend the time there that we spent here. I want you to see what's going on here in this chapter 2. So in chapter 2, he deals with the desert years, and that's covered in verses 1 through verse 24, the desert years. Let's just read verse 1 and see what it says here. Then we turned and journeyed into the wilderness of the way of the Red Sea, as the Lord spoke to me, and we skirted Mount Seir for many days. In other words, we're going backwards. And the Lord spoke to me and saying, you have skirted this mountain long enough. Turn northward and command the people, saying, you are about to pass through the territory of your brethren, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir. They shall be afraid of you. Therefore, watch yourselves carefully. Do not meddle with them. In other words, they're getting some instruction from the Lord. These are the desert years, the wandering years, when they weren't ready to go in when God said go in. Look at verse 7. For the Lord your God hath blessed you in all the work of your hands. He knows your trudging through the great wilderness. These 40 years the Lord your God have been with you. You have lacked nothing. And you see what he's bringing to remembrance. All the rebellion that you've been engaged in, but through all these years, you have lacked nothing because God has been with you. And then it talks about how uh, uh, in verse number 8, and when we pass beyond our brethren, the descendants of Esau who dwelled in Seir, away from the road of the plain, away from other names, we turned and passed by the way of the wilderness of Moab. Just wilderness wandering is the thing that I want you to see here. Then they're being reminded of this because hopefully the things that they have journeyed through in their past will give them a motivation to listen, hear, and obey God, so that they do not repeat this again. Look at now. We go down to the verse number 29. In this area deals with the king Sion defeated. How that God is showing them how I was with you, and I brought you victory concerning the king Sion, the king of Heshbon. And looking at verse 26, it says, and I sent messengers from the wilderness of Kedemosh to Sion, king of Heshbon, with words of peace, saying, let me pass through the land. I will keep strictly to the road, and I will turn neither to the right nor to the left. Verse 28, you shall sell me food for money that I may eat, and give me water for money that I may drink. Only let me pass through on foot, just as the descendants of Esau who dwelled in Seir and the Moabites who dwelled in Ar did for me, until I crossed the Jordan to the land which the Lord our God is giving us. But this king, Sion, this king would not let us pass through. For the Lord your God hardened his spirit and made his heart obstinate, that he might deliver him into your hands. So in other words, God did to the king of Sion what he did to Pharaoh. And the Lord hardened his heart that he would not act favorably towards the people, so that God would overthrow him. Sometimes when the Lord allows your enemy or causes your enemy to turn against you, even in a most responsible and reasonable request, sometimes that's a setup. God is bringing your enemy down, but it looks like it looks like your enemy is empowered because they will not cooperate with a simple request. So I want you to keep this kind of thing in mind when you face situations where there are people that should act favorably towards you, and yet they refuse to. And it looks like they're winning. It looked like Sion was winning, but the trick was that God hardened his heart to destroy him, as he did with Pharaoh. Look at verse 31. And the Lord said, see, I have begun to give Sion and his land over to you. Now, listen, if we were doing a teaching or preaching series here, just right here, this is such a big picture of what it's like and God's machinations, if you will, how that he behaves at times. He allows your enemy to become even more of an enemy, to become engrossed in their position so that he can use their position to destroy them. That's what he did with Pharaoh. Pharaoh, after several times, the Lord told Moses, tell him, I said, let my people go that they may worship in the wilderness, that they may go out a day's journey and to worship in the wilderness. And Pharaoh kept refusing. And ultimately, the scriptures then say, and God hardened his heart. Pharaoh was hardening his own heart, but then God hardened his heart. And even though he wanted to let him go, or might have wanted to let him go, he couldn't, because he had a hardened heart. Imagine seeing all of the plagues that God spoke and they came to pass. And then the last plague is that your son is getting ready to die tonight. Now, everything that has been spoken by Moses has come to pass. Now he says, tonight your son's going to die if you don't do what God said do. And Pharaoh refused. And the death angel came into the city and killed all of the firstborn sons because his heart had been hardened by God. Such was the case with the king of Sion. And God says, see, I've given that land to you. He thinks that he is preventing you and going to hinder you, but I'm giving you his land. He said, begin to possess it. We're still at verse 31, that you may inherit his land. Then Sion and all the people came out against us to fight at Jahaz. That's a location. And the Lord our God delivered him over to us. So we defeated him, his sons, and all his people. We took all his cities at that time, and we utterly destroyed the men, women, and little ones of every city. We left nothing remaining. We took all only the livestock as plunder for ourselves with the spoils of the city. Well, God's showing them how that even in your rebellion, there were times that I moved on your behalf and spared you from the hand of your enemy. And then the third chapter deals with something that is similar, and it refers to the king of Og, and that's chapter number 3, verses 1 through 11. And then in chapter number in that same chapter, beginning at verse number 12 through verse 21. He deals with the land east of the Jordan being divided. And this land is divided among three tribes, and that is the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the Manasseh. So let's just look very quickly, because this is the east side. This is before going into the promised land. This is a dividing of land to the tribes on the east side of the Jordan, whereas the other tribes are going to be divided on the west side of the Jordan. So let's look at it just for a second here. It says, and this land which ye possessed at that time from Aora, which is by the river Arnon, and half of the mountains of Gilead and its cities, I gave to the Reubenites and the Gadites. Okay, so the children of Gad, the children of Reuben. So Reuben is the oldest son, and then to the son Gad. The rest of Gilead and Bashan, the king of Og, I gave to half the tribe of Manasseh. So we see the positioning of Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh on the east side of the river Jordan. All right, and maybe we'll come back to that at sometimes. Well, let's look at verse number 18. It says, "Then I commanded you at that time, saying, the Lord your God has given you this land to possess. All your men of valor shall cross over armed before your brethren, the children of Israel. But your wives and your little ones and your livestock, I know that you have much livestock, shall stay in your cities, which I have given you, until the Lord has given rest to the brethren as to you." In other words, God says that, hey, I'm allowing the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh to be over here on this east side, but y'all can't chill completely until the rest of your brethren have gained access to the land that I'm giving to them. So you can leave your women, your children over here, but the men of war, the ones that can fight, you got to come to the other side. You got to help your brethren possess their land before you can rest in your land. That's what he's saying here. And I just wanted us to see that a bit, okay? And then in this third chapter, here again, we get the forbidding of Moses to enter into the land. So let's just look at that real quick. It says, then I pleaded with the Lord, Moses talking at that time, saying, "O Lord God, you have gone to show your servant your greatness and your mighty hand. For what God is there in heaven or earth who can do anything like your works and your mighty deeds? I pray, let me cross over and let the good land beyond the Jordan, those pleasant mountains, and see the good land beyond the Jordan, those pleasant mountains and Lebanon." But the Lord was angry, verse 26, with me on your account and would not listen to me. There it is again, the real statement of Moses not being able to enter into the land. He said, the Lord was angry with me on your account because of y'all. Moses pointed that finger. He said he was angry with me because of you all and would not listen. The Lord wouldn't listen to him. So the Lord said to me, enough of that. Speak no more on this matter. God said, I don't even want to hear it anymore. Go up to the top of Pisgah, Mount Pisgah, if you will, and listen and lift your eyes and look to the west, the north, the south, and east, and behold, it is with your eyes, for you shall not cross over this Jordan. But command Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, for he shall go over before this people. And so we see the journey of remembrance. We see the commitment to remembrance. And then finally in chapter number 4, all the way up to verse number 44, is still dealing with issues of remembrance. And then beginning in verse 44, there is the introduction of the law. So if you scroll down to verse 44 in chapter number 4, you see now this is the law which the Lord set before the children of Israel. These are the testimonies, the statutes, and the judgments. So this whole area now, beginning at chapter 4 and verse 44, is dealing with the law. It's the repeating of the Ten Commandments and related laws that God is giving to them. Now, and that's verse 44 through verse 49. Those are God's getting ready to launch into the Ten Commandments. He's looking back and reminding them of the word that has been given to them. Now let's go back up in this chapter for just a moment to look at a few things. So in chapter 4, Moses commands obedience, and verses 1 through 13 is really Moses going all in and telling the people the importance of them obeying. Look at verse number 1. It says, "Now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and the judgments which I teach you to observe, that you may live and go in and possess the land which the Lord God of your fathers is giving you. You shall not add to the word which I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you." This is where a lot of people get this. Don't add to it, don't take away from it. That's where they get it from. Is that your eyes have seen what the Lord did at Baal Peor, for the Lord your God has destroyed from among you all the men who follow Baal of Peor. But you who held fast to the Lord your God are alive today, every one of you. So he's reminding them of the importance of obedience. And let's look at the last part of that, because verses 1 through 13 covers that. Let's just look at verse 13. It says, "So he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, the 10 Commandments, and he wrote them on tablets of stone. And the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgment, that you may observe them in the land which you cross over to possess." Now, all of this is Moses again. He's saying, I'm instructing you in obedience. I'm instructing you to follow what God says. And he's making it very clear to them. He's making it very clear to them that he's making it very, very clear to them that that this is where their critical failures have been in the past. So the first thing he tells them is to obey God's commandment, and he gives them illustrations of where they didn't do so before. But then he not only deals with their disobedience, he also deals with their idolatry. In verses 15 through verse 40, it really dealing with just touching on issues of idolatry, where they began to do things and raise things that were before God, that was acts of idolatry, acts of dishonor to God. So he tells them to beware of idolatry. Beware of putting things up before God, graven images and what have you. Let's just read a couple of verses to see this. He says in verse 15, "Take careful heed to yourselves, for you saw no form when the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the midst of the fire." Said, don't get into graving images, because when God spoke to you, you didn't see no image that you could try to formulate God into some human form. He says, don't do that. In verse 16, it says, "Lest you act corruptly and make for yourselves a carved image in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, or likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground," so on and so forth. So this is really getting into the idolatry. Look at verse 20. "But the Lord have taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace of Egypt." Remembrance, book of remembrance. Brought you out of the furnace of Egypt, to be a people in an inheritance as you are this day. Furthermore, verse 21, the Lord was angry with me for your sakes and swore that I would not cross over Jordan and that I would not enter into the land. In other words, Moses is saying, he's repeating that again, and he's pointing out that not only do they have to walk in a spirit of obedience to enter into the land, but they got to make a commitment to not allow themselves to get into idolatry. That is, putting something up before God, worshiping images, and operating with strange fire. And if you want to look more into it, just read those verses that we don't have time to really look into. All right, um, and then I like this verse 41 through 43 because this section deals with cities of refuge east of the Jordan. So remember that Moses talks about these encampments of Gad and Reuben and half of the tribe of Manasseh, the two and a half tribes that remain on the east side of the Jordan. And so he addresses something that's very important that will become a reality even on the west side of the Jordan, and that is the cities of refuge, places that people who have done wrong, people who are destitute, people who had various diseases that pushed them away from the common society, places that they could go. Look at verse 41. Then Moses set apart 3 cities on this side of Jordan towards the rising of the sun, that the manslayer, somebody that killed somebody, might flee there, who kills his neighbor unintentionally, because there were various penalties for killing someone intentionally, but who kills his neighbor unintentionally, he would have a place of a city of refuge that they could flee to, without having hated him in the past. So basically, talking about accidental or heat of passion kinds of incidents, and that by fleeing to one of these cities might live. In other words, in those cities, you couldn't come and opportunistically kill someone or take someone because they had done a deed that was wrong. But there were circumstances. It had to be where this was a person that killed someone in a heat of passion. It was not something that was planned or intentional. And it could be indeed accidental. And this is just talking about the death, but we're talking about there were other forms of crimes and activities that could occur that people could find refuge in the cities of refuge. And we'll talk about that more as it comes up in other places. And then, as I already talked about, the introduction to the law. Now, I went through that because I wanted us to understand the impact of this book of remembrance. And then I want us to know, and as we talked about it last week, the chapters basically beginning in chapter 44, we already talked about that, all the way through chapter 11. It's just a rehearsal of the 10 Commandments. It is laying into the 10 Commandments, and we know that that a part of that is the Shema that comes up. That we already talked about that a bit, but we know that those chapters are just dealing with a repetition of the 10 Commandments, a reminding of the 10 Commandments. That is from chapter 444 through chapter number 11. And then the way that we get to the conclusion in this book is to remember that chapter 12 through chapter 26 is dealing with related commandments. So there are a lot of instructions to the people of God regarding the things that they must do, how they must treat with one another, issues of reconciliation, issues of repayment of debts, obligations. Those things come up with related commandments. And related commandments are really are covered through these various chapters, chapter 12 through chapter 26. So we got into them. You hear a lot of different commandments, but we know that the core to the law is the 10 Commandments. But then these chapters relate to various commandments for living, various commandments for problem solving. What if someone wrongs you? What if someone takes your sheep? What if someone slays your animal, and so on and so forth? Ways to resolve conflicts and issues along those lines. So remember that chapter 4, verse 44, all the way through chapter 26 is dealing with related commandments. The first of those chapters up to 11 deals with the 10 commandments. And then from 12 through 26 deals with related commandments. And so then we get to the third major section here. It is the part that deals with options affecting their future, options affecting their future. And this is chapter 27 through chapter 30. And this is where we get beautiful songs by Fred Hammond, like, I'm blessed in the city, I'm blessed in the field, I'm blessed everywhere I go. And then people get to really sing it and they say, bless, bless. You know what I'm saying? Well, those come out of the blessings and cursings of chapter 27 through chapter 30 of the book of Deuteronomy. Those are the option chapters. Now, coming out of the commandment chapters is now the chapters that deal with what your options are. So we dealt with chapters that deal with your remembrance, remember and recalling what you did wrong, how you messed up, and how God was still with you. Then we deal with chapters that renew the 10 commandments and that deal with other commandments that relate to how you are to live in the land that God has given to you. But then we deal with the option chapters. And the option chapters are chapters that say that if you do what is right in the land, if you hearken diligently unto the Lord, then you'll be blessed in the city, you'll be blessed in the field, you'll be blessed coming and going, and the ground will produce for you, and all kind of favor will be upon you. But in those chapters as well, we deal with, but if you do not hearken diligently unto the Lord to keep all that he has commanded you to keep, then cursed you'll be in the city, and cursed will be the ground, and so on and so forth. So it is the option chapters, chapter 27 through 30. Why is it option? Because they get to choose whether to obey God. And if they choose to obey him, then he said, I'm going to bless everything you set your hands to do. And I love those chapters because he says stuff like this. I'll make you the head and not the tail. I'll make you the lender and not the borrower. You see, all of it's tied to loving the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and hearkening diligently unto him, obeying him. And those chapters lay out the option that they have. God tells them up front what they got coming. If you will hearken diligently to do what the Lord has commanded you to do, then I'm going to bless everything you set your hands to do. But also know that if you will not hearken diligently, then you're going to run into the curse. And all of this is just a way of saying to them, look back at what happened in the past, how that I was with you until I wasn't. And remember, that's the kind of God that I am. That if you'll hearken unto me and you'll be obedient unto me, I'm going to bless what you set your hands to do. But if you refuse and you rebel against me, then you're going to experience the judgments of God. All right? And then the last part of this book is chapters 31 to 34, and those are the parting words of Moses, commonly referred to as Moses' benediction, if you will. It is the parting words of Moses. And so our time is certainly away here, but I just want to take a moment to just read a little bit of the parting words of Moses as we close this book out. So let's look at chapter number 31 and just see just a couple of things that are a part of the parting words of Moses. So chapter 31 says that and Moses went and spoke these words to all Israel. And he said to them, I am 120 years old today. I'm 120 years old today. It's my birthday. 120 years. I can no longer go and come in. And also the Lord has said to me, you shall not cross over this Jordan. The Lord your God himself crosses over before you. He will destroy these nations before you, and you shall dispossess them. Joshua shall cross over before you, just as the Lord has said. And the Lord will do to them as he did to Sihon and Og. Remember, we talked about them, those nations that they took over. the kings of the Amorites and their land when he destroyed them. The Lord will give them over to you, that you may do to them according to every commandment which he have commanded you. Be strong and of good courage. Do not fear nor be afraid, for the Lord your God, he is the one who goes before you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. Same words that God's going to ultimately speak to Joshua in Joshua chapter number 1. And Moses called Joshua. These are parting words of Moses. Moses called Joshua and said to him in the sight of all the people, this Moses talking to him, be strong and of a good courage, for you shall go with this people to the land which the Lord has sworn to their fathers to give them, and you shall cause them to inherit. Look at Moses prophesying. And the Lord, who is the one who goes before you, he will be with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. You do not fear nor be dismayed. Now, these words are so similar to the word of the Lord that comes directly to Joshua in Joshua chapter number 1. It shows you how close to the heart of God that Moses was, that he could state the word of the Lord to Joshua. That next book that we get into, God's going to speak those same words directly to Joshua. And listen to, so we look at verse number 9, the law to be read every 7 years. I won't get into that, but that's what Moses began to give them instructions that every 7 years there's to be a gathering, an appointed time, a releasing of the year of release at the festival of the tabernacles. When all of Israel shall appear before the Lord God in the place where he chooses, you shall read this law before all Israel in their hearing. Every 7 years there was to be a gathering in that just for the reading of the things that Moses had written. And then further in verse 14, Moses' prediction of Israel's rebellion. And then the Lord said to Moses, behold, the day approaches when you must die. Call Joshua and present yourself in the tabernacle of meeting, that I may inaugurate him. So Moses and Joshua went and presented themselves in the tabernacle. Now the Lord appeared in the tabernacle, in a pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud stood before the door of the tabernacle. And the Lord said to Moses, behold, you will rest with your fathers. Now, I mean, you talk about God telling, how many times has God told him that he's going to die, that he ain't going in, right? But notice in this place that we want to talk about the prediction of rebellion. And look at verse 17. Then my anger shall be aroused against them in that day, and I will forsake them, and I will hide my face from them, and they shall be destroyed. And many evils and troubles shall befall them, so that they will say in that day, have not these evils come upon us, because our God is not among us. And I will surely hide my face in that day because of all the evil which they have done, in that they have turned to other gods. So God speaks to Moses and tell them that the day is coming where your hearts are going to turn against me, and I'm going to bring judgment. I'm going to bring judgment upon you. All right. And so we are, as I said, we're out of time. But as you read through this, you deal with the Song of Moses in chapter number 32, where Moses began to give awesome proclamations by way of a psalm, as if it was written in the book of Psalms. And that's here in this 32nd chapter. And then it addresses the death of Moses on Mount Nebo. Verse 48 in this chapter says, and the Lord spoke to Moses that very day, saying, go up this mountain of Abiram, Mount Nebo, which is in the land of Moab, across from Jericho. View the land of Canaan, which I've given to the children of Israel's possession, and die on the mountain which you ascend, and be gathered to your people, just as Aaron your brother died on Mount Hor, and has been gathered to his people, because you trespass against me among the children of Israel at the waters of Meribah, Kadesh, in the wilderness of Zin, because you did not hallow me in the midst of the children of Israel. You shall see the land, but you won't enter in. Okay. So we talked about what brought Moses to this pass, where he didn't separate his anger and his frustration from his active ministry. Very important thing to bear in mind, that when you are on assignment from God, it's important for you to keep your behavior separate from God. If you're angry about something, if it's not something that God has sanctioned you to display your anger about, then don't display that anger in the context of ministry. Now, when you're not in ministry, if you're not doing an act of ministry, then maybe you can be angry and go off about something, but you cannot. It's a dangerous thing to be representing God and misrepresenting him at the same time. God spoke and told him to go and tell the people at the waters of Meribah, go and speak to the rock. And Moses struck the rock and cursed the people. Well, that's not what God told him to do. But it was an act of ministry. He struck the rock, water came out. But that's not what God told him to do. We have to be careful to separate us. Now, what Moses could have did is said, God told me to speak to this rock, but I'm going to strike it with this rod. I want you to know that's me. And this is the kind of thing that Paul was very careful about. Paul said, in 1 Corinthians 7, Paul was talking about marriages and relationships, and there came a place he says, well, the rest speak I and not the Lord, but I have the Spirit of Christ. In other words, Paul made a distinction between that was coming directly from God and that which was by way of his judgment based upon his spiritual experience. And he was able to do that. It's right there in the Word of God. Moses could have come to the rock and said, I'm angry at all of you, and God didn't tell me to say nothing, but I'm here saying this because my flesh is having a problem with you. He could have said, my flesh is striking this rock. But he represented the character of God, but his behavior was inconsistent with the character of God. And that's what brought the judgment on him. All right. And so we got to close it out here. I think that there are two more chapters. Your 33rd and 34th chapter, but all of these are the benediction, the parting words of Moses, and that will close out the book of Deuteronomy. All right, and so I've taken more of your time. We're into the books of history. Next week, we're going to deal with Joshua. We're going to break it down. We're going to begin to put together the period of conquest, the conquest that takes place in the book of Joshua, the conquest. Now we come to the place where we've had wilderness wandering. We have preparation for entering into the promised land. Joshua is going to take us into the conquest. That is the taking of the land, the moving into the promises of God, and the establishment of a confederacy, if you will, the establishment of a government within the land that is in the nature of a confederacy, and it is in the nature of a theocracy where God is ruling, and then there are a confederacy of people that are brought together, listening to the rule of God and following the rule of God. And this is ultimately going to lead to the emergence of the people saying at some point way down in the book of 1 Samuel, give us a king that we might be like the other kingdoms. But we'll get to all of that in Jesus' name.